Welcome to Hobby Shop 1982, brought to you by page 121. The Hobby Shop 1982 series of videos is just something to make you think of older times when you'd walk into a hobby store with your friends and you'd see some brand new stuff on the shelf, or you finally pull the trigger on that item that had been there for a while but you kept passing on. The idea behind these videos is anything that would have been on the shelves prior to the end of 1982 can be featured. So anything from the late 70s to the very early 80s up to the end of 82. And today's topic is Top Secret. First published in 1980. This copy was bought in 1981. It wasn't bought by me. This particular copy was bought by my then girlfriend, now wife, who wanted to try her hand at role-playing or at DMing something for us. She hadn't game mastered anything yet. She liked the spy genre, so she went ahead and she picked this up with an idea toward running it for us. So I'm going to go into the history of the box set itself, our history with it, my wife's experience GMing this particular set, and the contents and all that good stuff. So today, Hobby Shop 1982 features Top Secret by TSR. Top Secret, an espionage role-playing game for 3 or more players, ages 12 to adult. Top Secret was first published in 1980. Merle Rasmussen is the author, and it's designed to evoke the old James Bond novels and films, John Steed and Emma Peel, Modesty Blaze, you name it, you can draw it out of here. The game itself is a nice little box set. As I said, my wife bought this back in 1981. She was new to role-playing at the time. She was excited about the idea of GMing us through this, and she did. She did a couple of very nice games out of this. The rules are a little exotic when compared to D&D, which I know can be a mouthful. I'm going to go into the rules a little bit, how you would create your characters, that sort of thing, and talk about our history with it. But for right now, I want to point out this particular edition that I have was published it's a second edition published in February of 81. So we're going to take a look at the box contents and what you got for your $12 back in 1981. This, of course, was on the shelves. Keeping in mind 1982 theme, this was on the shelves in 1982. So first you got, of course, the box, but in the box, you got the rule book. There's the rule book. It's about 64 pages, plus you get the character sheet in the back, which you could photocopy. Not easy to do in the early 80s. Photocopies weren't even around in the libraries. That wouldn't come until later in the decade, and even in the 90s in some places. And then around here in the Chicagoland area, at least in the late 90s, early 2000s, we had 5-cent copiers popping up everywhere in hardware stores and grocery stores all around. Made things a lot easier to photocopy. Also, getting a job in an office with a photocopier, is also a good way to do it. The other thing you got in the box was a handy-dandy little adventure. This is an interesting adventure that it's a good fit for a starter box in that it's kind of a generic adventure. So I'm going to take a thumb through that as well. So first we're going to start, and you also got 2 10-sided dice, the old TSR soft, roundy 10-siders, which I'm sure we actually still have around the house somewhere. I've put those away in storage years ago, since after all the years of use, they just kind of roll around on the table and don't really stop on a face anymore. So here we go. Top Secret espionage role-playing game. And as the foreword says, to evoke the images of James Bond, Modesty Blaze, Jim Phelps, Derek Flint, John Steed, and Emma Peel. That was the thrust of this game, is you wanted to be the spy, apparently wearing clothing from the late 70s, and you wanted to go on your various missions around the world. I like the premise. The premise was very popular with our group, but the game itself, well, there were a few things that kind of broke immersion for you. First off, we'll go into how do you construct your character. You have personal traits. You have 6 of those, pretty familiar. Your physical strength, your charm, which is your ability to relate to other humans in the game, willpower, this value is the measure of perseverance and dedication of this character, courage, this is the measurement of how well the character reacts in the face of danger, knowledge, the value is a measurement of the general intelligence of the character, and coordination, which is your degree of manual dexterity and quickness. And you would throw percentage dice, two 10-siders, one being indicating the ones and one indicating the zeros. And then when you would throw it, you would take a look. So if I threw a 0 to a 25, say I threw a 25, I would add a bonus to it so that my stat couldn't be any worse than if I rolled a 1. My stat couldn't be any worse than a 26. In this game, by the way, if your stat's not somewhere near 100, you got to be at least in the 70s. If you're rolling, an 01 and you're getting a 26 in a stat, it might be new character time. And here's why. From those stats, you derive your next set of stats, your secondary personal traits, which is offense, which combines coordination plus courage divided by 2. It reflects your general combat abilities. So that's a really important stat. So if you end up with a low stat in coordination or courage, you're going to have a crummy offense. Deception, which is courage plus charm divided by 2. This trait is used to bluff, whether in fighting or in conversation. Evasion is charm and coordination. Evasion is a physical ability to get out of trouble and is useful when deception fails. Deactivation is knowledge plus coordination. Deactivation is a measure of the agent's skill and ability to deal with such things as alarms, traps, and concealed mechanisms. Life level, really important. Physical strength plus willpower divided by 10. So even if you have 100 in both those stats, that's 200 divided by 10 equals 20. You're only going to have 20 hit points in this game. That's your max. You're going to end up more around 10 to 12. That makes this game about as lethal as Old Traveler. Movement value, physical strength plus willpower plus coordination. This is the trait move to determine how far your character can move in one turn. It ends up being fairly quick. Finally, the character should derive your tertiary personal traits, which use both primary and secondary traits. So my hand-to-hand combat value equals evasion plus physical strength. Use this trait fully is explained in hand-to-hand combat, and then your surprise value is deception plus evasion. The greater the trait, the more likely an agent is to be able to surprise enemies. And then you round to the nearest whole number. And it's an interesting thing. Unfortunately, you end up with 14 statistics. I know our group found that daunting, having still been pretty new to D&D and played some Gamma World by this point and a little bit of Traveler. 14 statistics is a lot to keep track of. Not insurmountable, and I realized that Mark Miller's Traveler T5 has a similar number of stats, but 14 is a lot. So then you come over to all the other stuff about your character. You get all kinds of details, how tall you are, the color of your hair, your age, whether you wear glasses, whether you can wear contacts, experience points, other statistics, languages you speak, and now you come to areas of knowledge. You can have areas of knowledge in which you can be a dabbler or an expert. Pretty interesting, because this was a skill-based situation, kind of like Traveler was. This game is primarily a skill-driven game, although you do have levels. You can be any one of 3 bureau in this game. You can be in the Investigation Bureau. Confiscation. Investigation is, of course, investigating crimes, things like that. Confiscation is theft, getting things back. You'd be like an Alexander Mundi type character. And then, of course, assassination, which is what everybody ran to. Experience points needed for various levels varied between these 3. Plus, you got the little level names, which were pretty cool. So if you were, I'll do these. Confiscation, they're more interesting. Level 1, you're a shoplifter, then a pilferer, then a swindler, then a crook, then a burglar, then a second-story man, then a thief, then a con man, then purloiner, and then, of course, a confiscator, and 10,000 experience points are earned each level after that. Levels were interesting in this game because really all they did was you could take your experience or your experience points, and there was a little conversion, basically 100 to 1, and you could use 100 experience points, got you 1 characteristic point that you could put anywhere you wanted to beef up your character a little bit. So it was kind of neat because the longer you played this game, the better your character got to be, assuming he survived. The experience points also would help you get paid more per individual job. Other than that, you don't really get anything. You don't get extra hit points just for experience points or anything like that. So a little bit of a D&D flavor, but a little bit of a departure. Now we go into the tools of the trade, and we go into weapons and things like that. The combat system in this is basically percentages. You calculate out if I have an offensive combat value of 75, 75%, and I have modifiers that total +5 for everything I'm doing. That's an 80%. If I throw two 10-siders, I need to roll 80 or less in order to hit you. So if I'm trying to shoot the bad guy with my gun, and he's over there, and after modifiers and everything, I need an 80%. I go ahead and I fire it. I roll a 62. Hey, I hit him. Neat thing about this was how they did cover. And this is how cover eventually came to be used in Battletech. And I'm sure there are other games too, but this is the first place I encountered this. So I've scored my successful hit, but this guy's behind a wall firing up over it. So that leaves his upper torso, his head, and his right and left arm exposed, but everything else is covered. Well, there's hit locations to roll here. If I get a successful hit, but I hit an area that's covered by the wall, in this case, I'll say it's his right leg, then I don't score any damage because he was protected by the wall. That was kind of neat and pretty innovative at the time. In fact, this entire game was advanced for its era. And I think that was some of the reason it didn't catch on as deep as it could have. There certainly was a following for it, and there certainly was support from TSR for it. And we enjoyed it for the time we played it. But it never had that big following, and I think some of it was the complicated rules. So then we go on to definition of agent missions, and then we can go for object targets, human targets, and then we go into the NPCs and contact reaction table. How are they going to respond when you make contact with them? So you could really reenact a Bond movie with this stuff. And of course, that excellent early 80s artwork, Earl Otis. Where would we have been without you? Here we go to the combat. Projectile combat. This goes ahead and describes what I just was talking about. There's surprise is a big thing. Getting the first shot off is a big thing in this. Because keeping in mind, you are in a situation where you only have a max of 20 hit points, realistically 12 to 15. So it's kind of important you get that first shot off. The projectile weapon value, the weapon itself actually added to your benefit to hit. If I have a 45 revolver, I add 28% to my projectile weapon value. So that's plus 28% to hit you. So again, if I'm sitting at 75 and I'm plus 28, it's 103. One thing I loved about this, a 0 through 5, or I'm sorry, a 1 through 5 always hit, and a 96 through 100 always missed. So there was always hits and always misses in this. We've played D&D like that forever. I like that. So then we have different weapons that are in here. Pretty interesting. Wide variety of weapons. There's even some illustrations to show us a little bit of the weapons. Again, pre-internet, so not easy to go ahead and find out what's going on. Here's your general information for your percentage for the injury location I was just talking about. So if I've successfully fired and I've hit you, but you're behind that wall, and I fire and I roll a 65 to a 79, I've caught you in the right leg, and the right leg is sheltered by the wall, therefore you take no damage. Then I would throw two 10-siders to determine the damage. The first 10-sider would decide if it was light damage or serious damage. The second 10-sider would decide how many points. So if I were to roll 10 and a 10 on two 10-siders, I would get the best of all worlds. It would be serious damage, and it would be 12 points. In this game, that's enough to possibly put a character down. So it's a lethal game. I think that was some of what didn't catch the D&D crowd too. It's the lethality of it. And then we have the hand-to-hand combat, which was interesting, advanced, but we found it clumsy. Basically, what you would do is in hand-to-hand combat, depending on your skill level, but I'm going to go to the furthest end of it, is if I was the highest skilled, I would have 3 actions I could do in my hand-to-hand. I would still need to roll my percentages to hit and everything, but I would use it on my chart here. So I'm going to say, okay, I could do 3 actions, which can be 2 attacks and 1 defense, or I could do 3 attacks and no defense, 2 attacks, 1 defense, or 1 defense, 1 attack, 2 defense, or 0 attack, 3 defense. So I would go ahead and I'd jot down on a piece of paper, if I'm going to, in this case, I'm going to be doing 2 attacks and 1 defense. So I'm going to do a shot to the groin and with my hand, and then with my foot, I'm going to try to kick him in the ribs, the lower ribs, and then I'm going to do a block, which is a feint. Now, my opponent is similarly going to do this, so we're going to roll percentages to see whether the blow lands, but then we cross-check each other on the chart, and we see, oh, the feint, oh, you block my shot to the lower ribs with your feint. So you were constantly cross-checking the defense to the attack. It certainly added depth and flavor to it. The problem was it was slow. It was very slow. And then you got into a problem because there's different levels of fighting. There's untrained combat, knife fighting, boxing fighting, judo combat, and then the catch-all of martial arts. The problem with that is if I had martial arts and you had, say, boxing, it was hard to cross-check these two charts and to make it kind of, there were less options and things. It was just confusing, I felt, to run it that way. And we found it slowed the game way down. Eventually, we just dropped these charts and went to a percentage hit. And then I think we assigned like half the defensive value as a blocking value. So if I had a 480 again for my combat value, if I was successfully struck in a melee hand-to-hand combat, I would then be able to try to block it with a 40 or less. This went faster, but still wasn't ideal. Plus, the lethality of this game, you didn't want to take a lot of damage easily. So then now we start getting into miscellaneous rules, which is falling from damage. You can have stuff that temporarily lowers some of your stats, like being inebriated or drugged. Pretty interesting. You could dial this in as tight as you wanted to. Here's how long you're unconscious if you're gassed. Stinky purple knockout gas gets you. Grenades. And again, we were familiar with a lot of this stuff because we had been playing Gamma World for a while and Traveler. So we had a lot of these concepts down. That sure looks like John Buscema artwork. John Buscema was a famous comic book artist, most notably for drawing Fantastic Four. And just continuing on through your temporary losses of body parts for whatever reason. And your sneak attack damage table captured by the enemy. There's even an execution table. When they've got Bond on the laser table and do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. Here's your table for that. Kind of interesting. The only game I remember having an actual execution table. And Q Division for special devices. That is definitely M Appeal. Very nice rendition. And that's kind of a short section. Q section's only a little over a page. I wanted more. Now, Dragon Magazine did do a fair amount of support for this in equipment and in modules. So we did play one or two of those out of there, one or two of the modules out of there too. And now we have the various organizations for espionage, glossary of espionage-related terms from 1980. And then we come to the conglomerate. Here's a bibliography of where they got the information from. Now we got a weapons chart through here, the various sheets that you would need as the DM. And then, of course, your character's agent's dossier, which is your character sheet, front and back, and then the other fine TSR products. And there's the back with various hit locations. One product that did come out late 82 was the administrative screen. You know me, I'm definitely a fan of the DM screen. This is a nice trifold DM screen that had all the weapon charts, had all the statistics you needed. Greatly improved when this came out. We'd been playing this game off and on for about a year by the time we actually got our hands on this in 1982, but this is absolutely worth it. Plus, it comes with a really interesting adventure, a mini scenario where the President of the United States, yes, Ronald Reagan, has been kidnapped by a group of French mercenaries up in Canada. So, kind of an interesting little scenario. It came with the DM screen. And now we're going to take a look at Adventure 001 for Top Secret. Operation Spreckenhaltestelle, codename Pisces. And basically what this is a generic city defined as being east and west. You're never told where. It definitely has like a European flavor to it. So East and West Germany is most likely. That's what we used it as. And a lot of us had taken German in high school. Yes, German used to be offered as a language in high school. Post-war high schools. and my wife had taken German. I had taken German, so we used to talk in German periodically. So you just go through here, and it gives you a lot of background on the city itself, and then it's pretty generic. There's a specific adventure in here, but it's pretty generic for what you want to do with the city. So this is kind of meant to be your sandbox, and you were going to go ahead and use this as a base of operations, and in fact we did. Beyond this adventure, we used this as this east-west city as a base of operations while we played this. Now my wife did GM this, back in the very early 80s. I want to say it was early 82, and she ran it for a group of about 4 or 5 of us, and we had a lot of fun. She came back one other time and did it, but she said she didn't really enjoy GMing as much as she thought she would, so she just wanted to go back to being a player. She would periodically DM D&D from then on, but she didn't really want to do any other games. So I took this over for a while, and we played it off and on through 82, and I'm sure we did a couple of games in the late 80s, but primarily this game got replaced in our rotation when Champions came out in 82. We just kind of went over to the superhero model. A lot of us were comic collectors, or at least some dabblers, and we went over to Champions at that point, and Top Secret unfortunately kind of got shelved with us. It still pops out now and again. It's been a long time since I've played this game. It's not a bad game. It needs tweaking. There was a second edition that came out in the late 80s, which I also have, and I have also run. I'll take a look at that some other time. But overall, this was a good game. Very solid, absolutely playable rules. If a little complicated, even by today's standards. I find these rules a little bit clumsy, and we had to do quite a bit of streamlining to keep that faster flavor that everybody's used to from all the years of playing D&D. Even compared to Traveller, we found this game kind of rules heavy and rules inhibiting a little bit. So that's all I've got to say for a fine game from the early 80s, Top Secret. We certainly had fun with this. It just wasn't the absolutely rip snorter type of thing that Gamma World ended up being for us. But it's absolutely a fun game. It's available on Drive-Thru RPG. It's for the nostalgia alone. It's worth looking at. I have to admit, I haven't opened this box in at least 20 years. I pulled it out, and I had an absolute blast reading through the rules again, and talk about flashing back to memories of just playing this game. We played the particular sessions down in my parents' basement, back in the early 80s, because I was still living at home. And this game was a lot of fun. So yeah, let me know what you think. If comments or criticisms, let me know what you thought of this little trip to the hobby shop in 1982. I hope you enjoyed it. I've had fun so far making these. I'm going to keep going, and let me know if you're interested in any in the future. So that's it for today for Hobby Shop from page 121. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.